All right, I have 2 o'clock on my computer here, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Emily Bell, and I'm the Communications Coordinator for the Florida Wildflower Foundation. We'd love for you to say hi in the chat and let us know what county you're participating from today. Thanks for joining us for our webinar, Florida's Native Flowering Trees and Shrubs. This is in honor of Florida Arbor Day, which was last Friday. While National Arbor Day occurs on the last Friday in April, Florida celebrates a state Arbor Day on the third Friday in January. This is because many trees are dormant at this time of year in the South, and it makes them easier to transplant without putting them through too much stress. So basically, it's a great time to plant a native tree to support wildlife. For those of you not familiar with our organization, our mission is to protect, connect, and expand native wildflower habitats through our education, research, planting, and conservation programs. Our work is made possible primarily through sales and renewals of the Florida State Wildflower License Plate. These funds, along with donations and memberships, allow us to support and create projects that build awareness and knowledge of native wildflowers and plants throughout Florida. We'd like to encourage those of you who find our programs valuable to consider becoming a member, making a donation, or purchasing the State Wildflower License Plate. And if you purchase or have the Wildflower Plate, you're eligible for membership. Just let us know you have the tag and we'll get you set up in our database. Be sure to check out our website for resources on planting and growing wildflowers, to learn where you can see wildflowers in bloom, for upcoming events, and more. We're also on social media, and you can find us on most platforms at FLA Wildflowers. Our next webinar, Blooms, Bugs, and Climate Change, presented by our board member, Ramona Johnston, will be on February 25th and will explore the effects of climate change on Florida's native wildflowers and insects. Also, stay tuned for many great field trips coming up this new year. Our January field trip to Nixon Smiley Pineland EEL Preserve this weekend is sold out. Our Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve field trip with the Nature Conservancy on February 28th only has a few spots left. This field trip is currently open to members and will open to non-members next Tuesday. If you're not currently a member but would like to join to try and snag one of those spots on the trip, you'll need to email our programs coordinator, Rose, after completing membership registration so she can provide you with the field trip registration link. And that's just for the Apalachicola Bluffs and Ravines Preserve field trip. We also have field trips to Archbold's Biological Station in Highlands County and Deer Lake State Park in Walton County coming up this spring. Our field trips can sell out quickly, so if you sign up as a member, you'll be eligible for early access, and you'll receive emails for that early registration. And I think Rose dropped the links you need in the chat. Be sure to follow us on social media, sign up for our newsletter, or check out flawildflowers.org/events to stay up to date on our field trips, webinars, and other events that we might be at. So with that, I just have a couple housekeeping items to go over. All attendees are muted with cameras off. If you have questions, please use the Q&A feature to submit them. The chat is active, but we don't monitor it for questions, so please use that Q&A. We'll address questions as time permits at the end of the talk, and if your question's not answered, you can email it to us at info@flawildflowers.org. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available on our website and YouTube channel within 24 to 48 hours. When it's available, you'll receive an email from us with a link to the recording along with a resource page and links from the webinar. And now, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Mark Tancig has been the Commercial and Residential Horticultural Extension Agent with IFAS Extension Leon County since 2016. In this role, he shares research-based best practices for sustainable landscape management with green industry professionals and residential homeowners. He also coordinates the Leon County Master Gardener Volunteer Program. Prior to joining Extension, Mark worked for Leon County's Public Works Department for 6 years and Growth and Environmental Management Department for 3 years. Prior to that, he also worked as a field biologist for the Florida Natural Areas Inventory. So without further ado, give us a moment to switch over our screens and we'll get started.
Thank you, Emily, for the nice introduction. And hello, everyone out there. Need to hide some things. Thanks again for the invitation, Florida Wildflower Foundation. And it looks like we have folks from all over. And I even noticed a couple Leon County folks say hello, so that's great. I'm going to talk about some of my favorite native flowering trees and shrubs. So get through here. Uh, Here's my contact information. Again, if you're in Leon County, you can come on by and say hi. But this is, we're on Facebook and the website and Instagram. If you are close by and you are interested in any programs we're offering here at the Leon County Extension Office, the Eventbrite is probably your best bet. We put this up, extension professionals put this up, and we let folks know that we help everyone, no matter what age, sex, religion, even your favorite football team. I'm a Gator. I work for UF in Tallahassee, so we have lots of fun with football season during football season. But I like to joke people that I even help Miami Hurricane fans. Okay, like it doesn't matter. Anyone's welcome. It's important to know just wherever you are that you have an extension agent nearby. So UF and FAMU are the two land grant institutions of the state of Florida, and we are here to provide you research-based answers. No YouTuber, no influencers, no AI, gobbledygook answers, but really good research-based answers for all of your gardening questions in my case. But you have an extension office near you, so I really encourage you to reach out to your local extension office, see what they're up to. There's lots of good information that they will have specific for your area. We have several areas of specialization. Mine is horticulture, but there's also agriculture, family consumer sciences, and many folks have heard of 4-H program that is also run through the extension office. So, again, if you have any questions in these areas, reach out to your local offices and you have someone there to give you a hand. As a horticulture agent, a lot of our outreach and education revolves around these 9 Florida-friendly landscaping principles. And so it's a really great program. There's not really anything that I've heard of in any other state that's quite like this, where all the extension agents are on the same page. And this is a really great program where by following these 9 principles, Floridians can still have a beautiful landscape, but protect natural resources. And one that maybe I'm assuming a lot of y'all are interested in is principle number 5 there, part of the wildflower group here, attracting wildlife and making your landscape an encouraging and welcoming place for the wildlife that's out there. Again, your lawns and gardens, they can provide these valuable ecosystem services, support wildlife, protect natural resources, but still give us that beautiful landscape that, has all the good economic and quality of life benefits for us. So what I'm going to talk about today will define Florida native flowering trees and shrubs. We will explore why we should plant trees and shrubs, especially a lot of these native species. We'll go over my favorite recommendations. I had to, I don't have all of them in here, but I had to keep it concise because I got time limitations here. But I think I got 10 or so plants that I'll highlight. And then we'll go over some really quick installation and maintenance best practices. So if you're getting ready to go out and select any of these trees or shrubs in honor of Arbor Day, Florida Arbor Day, when you get home and you plant them, just some tips on how to, do a good job to ensure it has it's successful and lasts a long time in the landscape. And then there'll be some resources at the end as well. Okay, so first, let's define Florida native flowering trees and shrubs. And again, this may seem kind of straightforward, but just in case you were wondering why I don't have some plants on the list and others, I wanted to, explain why, and also kind of wanted to highlight some that don't fit, that make great, that are still great native trees and shrubs, maybe not flowering. So Florida native, just to remember, I think this is probably group is well familiar with this, but these are species that have occurred naturally and evolved in Florida over time. So I'm not going to be showing you any crepe myrtles. Now, I know there's lots of hate towards crepe myrtles, but you got to admit they are a beautiful flowering tree, but they kind of get overused quite a bit. Um, you will also not see any shrubs such as camellias, gardenias, or even those for you South Florida folks, those amazing starburst clerodendrons. They're beautiful plants, and these are, considered Florida-friendly plants, but these are not native species, and we're just going to focus on native species today. Flowering. Okay, so this is where, coming up with the list, there was a group of us who were kind of throwing plants out there, and some of them that were, suggested, didn't quite fit because we are talking about flowering plants, right? So these got to be angiosperms. So if you'd never heard the term angiosperm, I want you to go do a deep dive later after the workshop and go learn all about angiosperms and, freshen up on your plant taxonomy. But so you're not going to see any conifers or gymnosperms on the list. So here's cypress tree, which is a great native tree for the Florida landscape. But this technically, it does not have flowers, and those what look like, seeds or fruits are actually considered cones, just like in a pine tree. All right, so no gymnosperms will be on the list, but I still wanted to highlight cypress trees. I also decided that they have to be pretty conspicuous flowers, right? And so one example here, beautyberry, a great Florida shrub, native Florida shrub to plant in the landscape. But most of the time, what's drawing our attention to beautyberry are those beautiful berries, right? The fruits, the product after pollination and flowering. And I can't tell you how many people have said, I've never noticed the flowers on beautyberry. Well, there they are. There's a little inset picture there. They just get missed. They're not very conspicuous. You will also not see any oak trees on the list because, again, they're not very conspicuous in their flowers unless it's that time of year where they're all like falling on your windshield and collecting on your car or your driveway. So this is the catkin. This is the floral structure of an oak tree. Oak trees are, if you want to attract wildlife, go plant an oak tree. But we're talking flowering trees and shrubs, which technically they flower, but I'm going to pick only plants that have some pretty conspicuous blooms on them. And we're talking trees and shrubs. Okay, so in Florida native, flowering trees and shrubs. So trees and shrubs are plants that produce woody tissue and in general have an upright growth habitat. Trees are, typically one stem growing pretty high. Shrubs, right, are multi-stemmed woody species with lots of stems coming up from the ground, not as big and tall as trees. So you won't see any amazing woody vines like coral honeysuckle here. But again, this is a great flowering plant, a native flowering plant. The hummingbirds will be all over it, easy to grow. You won't see any perennials, any tender perennials like the beautiful Stokes aster, right? This is another really great native flower. Full sun, handles a little bit of shade sometimes, and it's just kind of just jaw-dropping in how pretty it is. And there's not going to be any grasses in this one either. So we have our beautiful ornamental grasses. Here's muley grass, right? Gorgeous, gorgeous native, technically flowering, but it's not a tree and shrub. Okay, I think that's all of them. So there's my definitions. Next, want to talk about why should we plant trees and shrubs in general, but why should we lean on the native trees and shrubs? Right, trees and shrubs, usually in person, I kind of have the audience kind of spout off, what are the benefits of these things to humans? But here I just put them all out there for you, right? They're beautiful. They support wildlife. They provide us oxygen, pretty important. They sequester carbon, filter air, reduce runoff, provide shade, deflect wind and noise, provide privacy, barriers. Lots and lots of reasons to have plants around us. We know from research that, houses that have nice trees sell for more money, right? So economic reasons, are part of what drive you. They also help in that realm as well. But anyway, lots of good reasons to plant trees and shrubs wherever you can. Now, when you're deciding on what species to plant, our principle number one in Florida-friendly landscaping is the right plant, right place. And so you really want to make sure you match the species to the site. And it's important not to kind of cram or, force a plant into a particular location. Because usually what ends up happening is you end up watering it more, fertilizing it more, thinking it has a bug or a disease, and maybe you spray pesticides on it. So it's always good to make sure you are picking a plant that's going to meet the conditions of the site. And you want to make sure you plant it or, right spacing. So when I get to my tree profiles and shrub profiles, I'm going to give you the height and the width of these plants so that you plan accordingly and don't put it too close to the house where it then needs lots of trimming and pruning and this kind of stuff. Also, when selecting the species for your site, you want to make sure you aim for diversity, right? So if you're going to get something new, get something that you don't already have, right? Because that's really what's going to help support as much different wildlife as possible. And usually it's also going to give you different bloom times and, kind of fill in a little gap here and there. When we are looking and thinking of diversity, we also want to think of that vertical space. So the image over on the right, if you already have a lot of canopy trees, maybe you go for a sub canopy or another layer, and making sure you have lots of diversity in each one of these layers, because that again is what really provides the different niche habitat for various wildlife, and you just get more wildlife enjoying your landscape. And again, we do like to encourage folks to lean towards native species, and we'll explain why. Again, this is the Florida Wildflower Foundation, so I'm assuming a lot of you are kind of on board and you know what's going on here. But native species, they're better adapted to the temperature, the rainfall, the soils, the pests and diseases. They're even more adapted to storms, right? If they're Florida native, they've evolved with hurricanes and storms, and so they're typically, for the most part, you got a little bit more resilience there. But a big, big reason is that these native species, support the most wildlife. Lots of research showing that if you have non-native trees versus native trees in a home, in a landscape, or in a neighborhood, the neighborhood with more native trees will support more wildlife. So that's the main reason. But they're also more resilient too. And when we think about supporting wildlife, it's really important to remember that we are supporting a lot of insects with these species, right? And so a lot of us want to see the more charismatic birds or butterflies or mammals. But if you think of, back in school, the food pyramid and the food chain, the food web, right? All these big things need a lot of little things to feed off of, basically. So when we plant trees and we're putting plants in our landscape, we really want to support these little insects that are going to support everything else above it. So, and we got lots of cool adaptations and things you can, learn from nature. So we have leaf rolling weevils. So look at those. I mean, I don't know if you guys have ever noticed these little rolled up leaves and you're, falling off of an oak tree. But that little insect rolls that little leaf around, plops her egg inside the rolled up leaf. It drops on the floor, and the young, develop in that little rolled up leaf. One of my favorites all the way on the right is the twig girdler. This is another really amazing little insect that the female will go around and kind of looks like someone took a saw and just made a perfect cut to these twigs. And as that twig's about to fall, she will lay her eggs in there and it will develop on the forest floor down the bottom. Another reason not to be so tidy in the landscape. Leave a little dead stuff around there for all these insects that are growing up in there. And again, this is a series I put together of pictures for a presentation on oaks and basically dead wood, having it around and encouraging it, right? We're trying to protect and encourage the insects. The insects are in decline, and again, they feed a lot of the higher organisms. And so this is just one example of something that could be found on an oak tree, for instance. And so you have the flannel moth, the adult, you have the pus caterpillar in the larval stage next to it. These are the ones they burn. It's one of these stinging caterpillars. But you can see it sets up this little cocoon on a branch. And the cool thing about nature is that, there's all sorts of things that utilize this. So you now have this one insect living on a tree, but then this fly comes around. This is a parasitic fly that invades that cocoon, lays her eggs in there, and her young eat the cocoon of the pus caterpillar. Well, then another insect comes along and parasitizes the fly's larvae, and that's where you get this grub-looking thing. And then when nothing is using it, you even now have little micro habitat where an ant or a spider can live in that cocoon. And then eventually even the cocoon gets covered with a lichen, right? So we're gonna plant these trees and shrubs, these native trees and shrubs that bring in all these insects. And again, we're gonna support those insects so they can do their thing supporting all the other organisms above them. The great thing about living in Florida is we have lots of options, right? So when it comes to what species to plant, maybe there's too many options. Maybe that's not a good thing, but you got lots of, you got lots to choose from. And here's this great map from the Biota of North America project. This is if you love maps and biology, you want to nerd out on some things, they got some really great maps at the BONAP website. So this is the density gradient of native woody plant species. And so the darker green you get, the more richness you have in native plant species. And you can see Florida, we're doing pretty good. Okay, so my favorite native flowering trees and shrubs. I stuck with 10 though, the magnolias and the palms. I kind of threw a couple for each one of them. And you notice palms are going to have a little asterisk because I kind of fudged them in here, right? They're not they don't produce true wood. So they're technically not a tree or shrub, but I just really wanted to highlight the palms because a lot of folks don't consider consider them as really beneficial flowering species that really help out insects. So here's my 10. We're going to go through these, show some pictures. I did try, I assumed there'd be folks from all over. So I got plants that a lot of them can be statewide, but some I've kind of signified with either an N, a C, or an S for if they're north, central, or south. And so here we go. Magnolias is the first one. So when I think of a native flowering tree, especially a real conspicuous, amazing bloom, one of my first thing that comes to mind is a southern magnolia. They can be pretty large trees, right? So you got a height of 60 to 80 feet. You got a spread about 30 to 40. And these are mostly north and central Florida. I don't think they get too far down south of, say, Lake Okeechobee. They don't thrive, I don't think. But these have these just gigantic white blooms. When it comes to insects, pollination-wise, these are actually pollinated by beetles. So kind of a niche little, actually has to do with how ancient they are. But they're great habitat for a lot of insects, and their seeds and their cones are fed on by various mammals. Now we also have sweet bay magnolia, so Magnolia virginiana. This is more in the wild. It's more of like a wetland species, but this one does do pretty well in upland landscapes. This one is pretty much statewide. I've seen this one pretty far down south. This one's a little bit smaller than the southern magnolia, so a height of about 40 to 50, a spread of 15 to 25. And compared to the Southern magnolia leaves much smaller. They actually kind of have a little grayish tint underneath from these silvery hairs. So you get a little, when the wind's blowing, you kind of get a little, a little effect there. And they also have a beautiful magnolia type bloom. Now, if you're lucky enough to live in North Florida, you can grow the ash magnolia, which is just a gorgeous plant. This is a smaller tree, so about 15 to 30 feet, only about 10 feet wide. And this is interesting in that it's a deciduous magnolia. So the southern magnolia and the sweet bay magnolia are evergreen species. This one here will drop its leaves. It's closely related to what I think they call a cucumber tree up in the mountains, another magnolia. This is Magnolia macrophylla variety ashii, and this is kind of a special little tree of North Florida. And these blooms you can see are gigantic, and they smell amazing too. So we have one in our demonstration gardens here, and when it blooms, and you're walking to the back door, you can smell and you know that it's the magnolia is blooming. Again, this one's only mostly for North Florida. Moving on, we have redbud. So redbud is a great selection for your Florida Arbor Day planting. This is more of a sub-canopy tree, so it doesn't get as big as the southern magnolia. It maxes out about 20 to 30 feet, spread of about 15 to 25. And this one's another North Florida, Central Florida species. This is in the legume family, so you can see in the inset there, this has got hundreds and hundreds of little pea-shaped pink blooms. This one's going to bloom in the spring before anything else really has finished leafing out. And it's just striking. I mean, here, this is somewhere in North Florida along a street. Makes a really good street tree. There's some issues with red buzz not lasting a super long time in the landscape. Not really sure why, but this is one where if I've had these for a long time and just kind of just leave it alone. Does great, blooms every spring, and is a nice little indication that the warmer weather is on its way. Red maple, you could say I fudged it a little bit here with conspicuous flowers, but this one here, when the whole tree is blooming, individually, the flowers are pretty small, and they can really make a show-stopping kind of look early again in the spring is when you'll notice this tree flowering. Red maple, these can get pretty big, so make sure you got space for this one. It tends to like a little bit of shade, maybe a little bit of moisture. So you've noticed them planted in like parking lot islands. They don't tend to always do great, but give it some space, give it some moisture, maybe a little bit of shade. And this is north central, and we'll get into the upper part of South Florida, so maybe around Lake Okeechobee. I don't know how far it gets down near Miami. But red maple's great tree, again, provides for lots of different wildlife. And they get the cute little winged seeds. Again, another benefit for wildlife. And you even get, in Florida, we don't get a lot of fall color on our trees, but red maple is actually one that gives us some pretty cool color. Okay, here's the palms again. I kind of shoving them in here because I wanted to highlight some cool palms. I'm sure many of you know these palms, but I want you to think of these palms as flowering plants and flowering plants that are really beneficial to pollinators. So here's our state tree, which drives the arborist nuts again because palms technically aren't, botanically, they're not considered a tree, a true tree. But right, we throw them in there with the trees because they're tall and got one trunk. Cabbage palms, these can get, 40 to 50. They can sometimes get even taller. I think these are some here in front of the fort in St. Augustine. Not a very wide crown. Location-wise, they can be throughout the state of Florida. And there's their bloom. A lot of folks don't recognize these things going on. They might notice the fruit falling down eventually and get kind of annoyed by it. But, if it's fruiting, a good chance there was a flower at one point. And if you've ever watched and you kind of just sat and observed palm inflorescence, that big cluster of blooms, you'll notice the pollinators are all over it. They absolutely love palm flowers. One thing to keep in mind with cabbage palm, and actually all of our palms, is in this case, there is a disease called lethal yellowing. Um, that is what is called the Texas Phoenix palm decline. Lethal bronzing, sorry, lethal yellowing is an older one than the coconut palms. Lethal bronzing. This one is coming through, and if you've gone up and down 75 recently, you'll see a lot of these palms that look like they died pretty quickly. I just want you to be on the lookout and maybe give your extension agent a call and say, hey, I got some palms that are doing this. So far, there's no way for us there's no treatment. It's one of these things where you got to kind of get it out of there. But just be on the lookout for palms in your area and get a hold of your extension agent, letting them know you got something weird going on, just to give them a heads up, especially if we're in North Florida, because I don't think we haven't got it here in Leon County yet. So I'm really trying to have folks let me know if they see any weird, quick dieback going on with their palms. Blue stem palmetto is one that is, these are all these plants are, readily available in your nurseries. This is one that's readily available in the trade. You don't see it used a lot, and it's just a great plant. So Sabal minor, this is blue stem palmetto. I didn't put it inside of the bloom, but it does get it's kind of hard to miss on this plant because this thing is, height of 2 to 7 feet. So it never gets really too far over your head. But this flower stalk, it sends up right in the center. Again, you get all kinds of activity from insects around the blooms. Uh, this is a nice, just kind of well behaved. So the next one's saw palmetto. If you planted saw palmetto, you know that sucker likes to spread like crazy. This little blue stem palmetto is really well behaved. You plant one, it kind of stays put and gives you that tropical foliage, and you get again these beautiful blooms that attract lots of wildlife. So location-wise, north, central, and south, everything I saw said all the way down to South Florida. I can't say I've seen it in the wild or even planted down there in landscapes, but everything I looked at, had it going down there. So let me know otherwise in the chat if you've tried this down south and it didn't work out too well. But little blue stem palmetto, a great shrub, we'll call it, for the Florida landscape. Next up is saw palmetto. Now, some folks in Florida think saw palmetto, it's just like a dime a dozen. It's all over the place, but it's really, saw palmetto is a Southeast US endemic, right? Like it gets maybe a little into Louisiana, it gets maybe into South Carolina a little bit, but Florida is it's its home, right? It's home base. And so this is a special plant for the Southeast United States. It's the only place you can find it in the world. And it really makes a good landscape plant if you give it some room, right? So again, this is not something you want to plant by a walkway or the road. I mean, this one's you can always go in there and kind of whack it back and put it in its place a little bit, but just make sure you give this thing plenty of space and plenty of be a little patient because you plant these little palms. They're pretty proud of them at the nurseries. You plant them, it takes a while for them to establish and fill in, but eventually they will. Another cool thing about saw palmetto is that there's lots of research now where they're looking at some of these old clumps of saw palmetto in like the Lake Wales Ridge and the scrub along there, and they think some of these things are like, these are like thousands of years old. Like not, there are a bunch of clumps coming out and, maybe the plants you're seeing haven't been there for 1,000 years, but these plants have persisted for that long. These individuals have persisted for that long. It's pretty amazing. Anyway, height 5 to 10 feet, spread 4 to 10, but man, they can really start to, like spread on you. And these can again be planted statewide. There you see the nice cluster of flowers. I think it's pretty conspicuous. I kind of like seeing saw palmettos in bloom. Here's one that you can't deny is a native flowering tree. This is flatwoods plum, so Prunus umbellata. This is in the rose family. You can see they look like little kind of apple blossoms there. But man, this thing blooms in the springtime. So we have one in the back of our building that's hasn't opened quite yet. But when this thing blooms, it's just like bright white. You can't miss it in the landscape. There's a closely related Chickasaw plum that also has beautiful white blooms, but it's really known for a lot of suckers, right? You get a lot of undergrowth and a lot of side growth from the base, where the flatwoods plum is, kind of well behaved as far as that goes. And it can be a real showstopper in a landscape. The height, it's more of a sub-canopy tree, so maybe 12 to 20 feet, same type of width that it gets. This one is mostly just North and Central Florida. Okay, so for my South Florida folks, I made sure I got some of these in here. And so this is one so I grew up in West Palm. Emily and I were talking about it earlier. I grew up in West Palm Beach. And this is one that I have my mom has in her landscape. So this is Jamaica caper, which Emily and other plant nerds out there, they did just change the name on this one because it used to be, oh, now I just lost the name. But anyway, it's Quadrella is the genus now. The height on this one is 6 to 20 feet, which is quite the range. This is one where you can see in the photo, if left to its own devices, may become more of a tree. My mom's landscape, every time I visit, I do a little pruning, and we keep it at a nice. It's probably 7 feet, 8 feet tall, nice privacy hedge. The spread about 8 to 12 feet, and this again is one down in Central and South Florida only. You might pull it off a little further north if you're on the coast, but you can see it's got very showy blooms. This is in the caper family, so it's kind of just unique and odd. And birds just love this thing. There's always birds going after it. Again, I don't get to recommend this one too much here in Tallahassee, so I'm not familiar with like some of the insects that might feed on Jamaica caper here, but I do know that the birds are always in those shrubs at the mom's house. Okay, here's some beautiful native shrub. This is our native azaleas. So there's rhododendron austrainum. There's also rhododendron canescens. So canescens are all flanked on the left and the right there with austrainum in the middle. A lot of folks may call this honeysuckle bush because not only are the blooms just amazing and kind of showstopper types, but they smell amazing too. I mean, it smells like the old bubble gum, like when I was a kid, the big Bubba Yubbas or whatever they were called, but these really like fruity smelling bubble gums. They smell really, really good. The height on these, maybe 8 to 12 feet. That's a pretty big specimen. It'll take a little while. Spread about 6 to 10. And this is one where South Florida folks, you probably won't be able to pull off our native azaleas. But this is where a more north central Florida species, and these are a real big treat to find in the woods too. So these bloom in the springtime, again, before a lot of the leaves are out. You'll get these just amazing blooms of azaleas. Tend to like shade and a little bit of moisture going back to these azaleas. So nice shady spot. It doesn't help if you got some good mulch or some good soil moisture going on. Okay, next one up is our oak leaf hydrangea. So this is a gorgeous, gorgeous native flowering shrub for North and Central Florida. This can get about to 6, 10 feet tall. So here on the right is a nice use of these in a landscape. And on the left shows kind of zooming in a little bit more on the blooms. Actually, a lot of what you're seeing there, if I'm not mistaken, are a lot of bracts. But anyway, you get these big showy displays. And these are much easier to take care of than any of your, French, the mop head type hydrangeas. Pretty straightforward, pretty tough, again, because they're native plants and they're adapted to all of our soil and temperature. The fancy hydrangeas, they always got fungal problems going on. This one prefers, again, a little bit of shade and does well in native in the wild. It's along riverbanks and whatnot. But I've had this in my upland landscape at the house. I try to remember to water it when we're going to drought for a while, but it's done really great over time. So next up on the list is one again for the Central and South Florida folks. This is tea bush. Now, so this is Malokia tomentosa, which the Malvaceae family, I'm pretty sure, the hibiscus family. And this one I've seen called like gray tea bush or silver leaf tea bush. I've seen quite a few common names for this one. This one my aunt has in her landscape down in West Palm Beach. And this one is a kind of a nice screen, kind of a sprawly shrub in full sun. But it's like always blooming, it seems like. And the flowers are, really beautiful when you look closely at them. Backing up, looking at the whole shrub, you just see kind of, tinges of purple everywhere. But talk about pollinators. They are all over this thing all the time. Every time I go visit my aunt, I'm checking out this thing and there's just always some insect activity around it. And my aunt would laugh, but if she can pull it off, anybody can because she does not claim to be a gardener at all. And this one I know is in, you can find it at the nurseries down South Florida. And then last up, some of you are like, wait, what? This is like a basic plant, the sea grape. But sea grapes, I think, have a very showy flower stalk, right? Inflorescence. And then they're followed by the really showy, almost like ornaments, right? Those fruits after they hang down, really, really pretty. This is a great one for Floridians thinking too. You've got some salt spray or salt influence if you're by the coast. This one handles it really, really well. Now, this one can be, left on its own devices like the one you see there. It is a tree, but a lot of folks treat it as a shrub, and they'll have to do some, regular pruning and maintenance, but you can keep it as a hedge. A lot of the big mansions on Palm Beach have it as like their kind of privacy hedge. So I like sea grapes. It's got a fun name, Cogolobo, and pretty pest free, right? Once you get it started, it does a pretty good job. Again, this one can get up to 50 feet if left on its own, with a spread of about 20 to 30. And again, this is going to be just a central South Florida species. I think that's all the plants. Now, in the questions, I threw a couple more pictures. There was a whole lot more I would have put in there, but we have time constraints, so I had to pick some and I had to just go with it. Now, if you've selected any of these trees and now you want to bring it home and get it planted, there's some, just maintenance, installation and maintenance best practices that I wanted to review for you all. And so things to consider even before you leave the nursery actually would be, think about the size of this plant that you want to purchase at the time you go buy it. So it's important to know research shows that a smaller tree will often catch up to a larger species or a larger specimen of the same plant. And that's because they go through less transplant shock. So you can, a bare root compared to a 2-inch caliper, it's possible, but just know that the smaller trees, not only are they a little less expensive, a little easier to manage, they often go through less stress and will catch up to those larger, real expensive, got to hire someone to plant it type of deal. You do want to look for vigorous growth. You want to look for good trunk and branch structure. So these images down on the lower left, right? You want to avoid all the little whips and the crooked, main stems. You want to find a good central leader with a nice kind of symmetry of side branches coming off of that main trunk. Sometimes it's hard to do at the nursery, but if you can, pull that sucker out of the pot and look at those roots. If you see something like shown here, that's something where you might want to pick something else, right? You might want to select another of the same species or just, skip them all together. Just because this is just a sign that it's been in that pot for a long time. When you go to plant it, you're going to want to cut a lot of that off, which is going to cause more of that stress. So if you can find something that's not all pot bound, that's better. You also want to look for some other defects, right? So like the twig here showing where it's been pruned very close to the main trunk. That's not a good pruning cut because it allows a disease to get into that main stem. You can also see things like the marks of the straps. So a lot of times these trees at the nursery, there'll be like a bamboo pole in there, and there'll be some kind of plastic material kind of keeping it attached to that bamboo pole. If it's left it for a long time, you can actually see where some of these trees are growing over, and it's almost like girdling the tree. So just look closely at those types of things. The photo on the right is just a reminder, like sometimes these deals are too good to be true. Right? So if you see a tree like that over on the right on sale, that's too big of a tree for such a little pot, right? And you know that there's going to be some root issues there. So sometimes those good deals are too good to be true. So just be skeptical. The size of the tree should sort of match the size of the pot. Now, when you go to install it, this is pretty straightforward, right? You dig a hole, you're going to take your plant out of the container, you're going to inspect those roots, you're going to fix any defects you might have. When doing this with Master Gardener volunteers, a lot of them are kind of shocked at how rough I am with the roots and, cutting things off and pruning and sawing, whatever I'm doing. But it is important because you do not want those roots to continuously just grow in a circle. You want them to spread and move out to the soil. Inspect your roots, place the plant in the hole, and make sure it's straight before you start backfilling. So that's, it's always good to have a little helper to kind of take a couple different angles, make sure you don't get that tree on a crooked foot. When we're talking about digging our hole, we do, you want to dig the hole a little bit, or they recommend 1.5, 2 times wider than the root ball. It's because you want to give that those expanding roots nice loose soil to move into. You also want to make sure that when you plant the tree, one of the things I didn't quite go over here is you can see it right here a little bit. This is the root flare. And so you want to find that first root that kind of breaks off of the main trunk, and that is going to be your kind of guide for the depth of how to plant it in the hole. And oftentimes you have to take off, a couple of inches of soil in the pot where they've just been kind of topping it off to make it look full. But you don't want to plant this tree too deep, and you want to use that root flare as your guide. So, dig your hole, place it in the hole. Hopefully, you don't have to, keep taking it out and digging and filling and see what happens. But you want that root flare to be a little bit above natural grade, right? So most of that material that the plant is growing in is some kind of organic matter that's going to rot and settle. And you want to kind of you want to take that settling into account when you plant the tree. And which we don't want is that root flare to be too far below natural grade, get covered with soil, because then that tends to lead to some rot issues and fungal issues at the base of that tree. So have that root ball sitting just a little bit above natural grade. Start backfilling, and this is where you don't want to take your boots and stomp on it. Just nicely tamp it in by hand. Water it in really well, and that water will get rid of any air pockets. You don't want to compact the soil around your root ball because those roots need to breathe. Again, you're going to backfill, you're going to water it in, and then place a nice area of mulch around that tree. One of the there's a common problem with trees planted in the landscape is they get weed eater line damage as the landscapers kind of go around trying to hit the grass near the tree. They tend to hit the trunk of the tree a little bit. And so give that tree some space. The mulch also helps, reserve moisture and all these kinds of things. But a big reason to use mulch is to keep those string trimmers away from the trunk of the tree. Let's see, some initial maintenance. So irrigation is really, really important when you first get that tree or shrub into the ground. Arbor Day, like Emily mentioned, in Florida is celebrated in January. There's a really good time to start trees and shrubs and plant them. And this is typically when, there's not as much water demand on the plant. It's a little cooler, days are shorter, but it's still really important to make sure that after you plant the tree, that it's on a really regular watering schedule for really the first, several weeks into months. And so there's a little chart here put together by the folks on campus about, what's the size of these plants and what is the irrigation schedule that you want to keep them on in your home landscape. The schedule for vigor, that's the best plan. The irrigation schedule for survival, let's say if it's a park or a kind of a location not very close to water, that'll keep them alive. But if you want to do really well, you follow that schedule for vigor. And you can see something smaller than a 2-inch caliper. So that's, something about yay big or smaller. What you're doing is, almost daily for 2 weeks, you're going to go out there and give it a good amount of water. Down below is how much water, right? So shrubs, about a gallon per application, where for trees, you're looking at maybe 2 to 3 gallons per application. And so those, that daily watering lasts for about 2 weeks, and then you start to back off and you go to every other day. And then, once a tree is established, and that's kind of a funky little definition, but basically once it's sprouting new growth, you go and you shake the tree, lightly, you can tell that those roots have kind of stuck into the soil. That lets you know that it's established. And at that point, you can kind of just back off. Especially, I mean, these are native trees we're talking about. Again, well adapted to the climate. You might want to give them a little bit of water as we get into times of drought, but otherwise, you can kind of let them go on their own. So irrigation is the most important after planting. It's really important to know that fertilization is not needed. You don't need to put fertilizer in the hole of the tree or the shrub. You don't need to put any fancy compost or topsoil in that hole. You want that tree to get used to the soil that it's going to be growing in long term. And it's important not to fertilize because those are, exposed roots. So you want to let that tree get established. And really, fertilization may not be needed for a lot of these. Again, these are native plants. The fertilization is mostly to help do for the plant to do something we want it to do. For the most part, with these native trees and shrubs, you can kind of just let them be. Pruning. I showed pictures of that nice, strong central leader, that nice, strong central trunk. In new trees, this is important to get started. So if you start to notice your new tree kind of forking off at the top, you might want to pick one of them and let that be the main leader. So you kind of top the other one. You don't take it all the way back, but you kind of cut in half, say, and you let that one fork become the main trunk. Because in our landscapes, especially, you want to really get the tree started on a good foundation for structure. And when you get lots of these forks, that's where you then get, failures during storms, where it's not as structurally sound. Your local extension office can help you if you got questions about a particular tree in your landscape. Established plants, right? We want to keep that mulch going. We don't want to do mulch volcanoes. This, I hope, was just for a silly, picture or something, but I have definitely seen similar, maybe not so extreme, but I've seen where mulch is piled all up on the side of the trunk. Anytime you're mulching your trees or shrubs, go ahead, throw a bunch of mulch down there, but then pull it off of the trunk. Again, this is a good, that's a, leaving that mulch piled up on there is a great way to encourage disease, fungus. Again, once it's established, you only will need to water when needed, fertilize if needed. Your local extension office can also set you up with a soil test kit where you can go take a soil test, send it off, and you can get results back and confirm if you need to provide fertilizer or not. But remember, if the tree's doing good and the shrub's doing well and it's making you happy, it probably doesn't need fertilizer. It's probably fine as it is. And then again, pruning on larger established trees. Again, we're going up in the left. You can see what we're kind of going for. We're looking for a nice, strong central trunk in these larger trees. If you need help with this, this is where you may want to consider reaching out to a certified arborist or a professional that can kind of help you with that. Okay, and then pests, right? So we're planting these things. Well, they actually up in the top right, you can see those the non-living factors, the abiotic factors such as string trimmers, getting the base of that tree. That's why mulch is really helpful. But insects and fungi. So when it comes to insects, remember that we're planting Florida native trees and shrubs because we want to support wildlife. So sometimes that means they're going to eat some of your trees and shrubs. But think of this, so this is a tent caterpillar. Think of these as little like mobile bird feeders, like temporary bird feeders sitting up there. They might munch on some of your plants, but again, these are native trees. These are mostly native insects. They've had a long time to work out these relationships, and for the most part, they're not going to, kill or, severely damage your tree. They're usually pretty temporary. They move on. The tree survives and grows out of it, and everything's fine. With fungal diseases and fungal issues, this is again those best practices of installation, making sure you're not overwatering, not piling mulch over the trunk. Um, sometimes you will get disease in your tree, but that's where again your local extension office can help you confirm what it is and tell you the best path forward. When it comes to storms, that good pruning and that good structural kind of getting it set up and foundation at the beginning is really important. We do have some publications on, like the most wind resilient trees and this kind of stuff. But just know again, we're going with native species. They've evolved to high wind situations. And a lot of them, the main thing with storms, you want to make sure it's not a risk to your structure. But as far as the tree goes, a lot of these things, and a lot of the ones I mentioned, I'm thinking of, if they get beat up by a storm, they pretty quickly sprout back and are, back growing again. Okay, so resources. Your local county extension office, and I think Rose has these in a something she's going to send you or he'll have access to. But if you click on the link for your local county extension office, you can go by district and find the website for your local office, phone numbers, people who work there. Our gardening solutions website is really great. So UF's gardening solutions page, this is where there's a whole thing on native plants, and it's just a long list of all these native species. You can click on it, find some more information, and oftentimes they have more in-depth species profiles. The tree fact sheets, the shrub fact sheets, that's like several hundred fact sheets on various trees and shrubs that'll tell you the basics of, how it grows, the shape, where it can be planted, common pests, common diseases. They're really great starting points for learning more about the potential tree you're selecting or shrub. Florida-friendly landscaping principle page. This is will get you started on lots of great information on those 9 principles I mentioned. And then the UF also has this great Florida-friendly landscaping plant selection database. So this allows you to, they sometimes call it an app, but you can just use it on the browser. You put in your zip code, and then you can start saying, okay, I'm looking for a native tree for zone whatever that attracts wildlife. And it will actually spit out a listing of plants that meet your specifications, and you'll have pictures. It'll have all sorts of, the size, all sorts of extra information, the, sunlight, water levels it likes, all that kind of stuff. Now, there's some other great resources as well to help you with selecting the plants, trees, and shrubs for your landscape. And of course, Florida Wildflower Foundation has a great one. They have this really great plant selection guide that you can utilize. The Florida Native Plant Society, they also have a really great plant database that's all native species, so that's great. The Xerces Society. So Xerces Society, they're all about insect conservation, and they have some really great resources on their webpage, including this manual for Florida that's specifically for plants that attract pollinators and other beneficial insects. That's a really good great resource. And then, of course, the last one here, Florida Association of Native Nurseries. So if there's a species that you're looking for and you can't find it at your local garden center, FAN is a website. It's a kind of a collective of all the native plant nurseries in the state. And you can do a search on their website for, tea bush, and it'll give you a list of nurseries that have it for sale, the sizes they have, the numbers to call. So a really great website if you're looking for uh, procuring some of these native species. Okay, I made it on time, not too bad. Here's my contact information and questions. Why didn't you put this plant or that plant in there? So there's marlberry on the left. That one just didn't make the cut. That's a really great one for Central Florida, South Florida. And then on the right, there's Buckeye. These were ones I thought of after I'd already put the thing together. And I was like, oh man, that one's not in there, but I can't put them all in there. So on the right, that's Buckeye, which is a really great North Florida small tree for the landscape. That's, as you can see, pretty stunning. And with that, I will turn it back over to Emily.
Great. That was fantastic. Thank you so much, Mark. Great tree highlights. I want a second, including the palms, because we get questions every year when they flower of people who, like you said, don't even know that they flower, and they do have
Yes.
wildlife value. So, but all really great choices and the information on planting as well. So, we do
Great.
have a few minutes, and we do have some interesting questions popping up. Um, One that I'm curious about too is, do you have a metric for basically deciding when a tree is established? Like, I've planted this tree.
Mm.
At what point do you feel like, okay, this tree is there and it's good to go?
So we teach this to commercial landscapers, right? And there's this whole thing about wait to fertilize before it's established. And there's some like real vague definition we give them. So there's no great I mean the metric and the definition we give is once it's like its roots are on it, it's spreading in the soil around it and it's providing what it needs on its own. It doesn't need supplemental help from us for watering and this and that, but it's a hard thing to prove. So again, one thing, this is the way when I go to landscapes and they're having problems with trees, for one of the times, the first things I'll do is I'll grab the trunk of that tree and kind of shake it. And if their root ball is still like flopping around in the hole, then that plant is not established. Something did not go well there. And so that's a good little trick of like, hey, but the thing is, you don't want to tug it or push it around too hard because you don't want to break any roots. So if you start to notice it, it's sending out a lot of new growth, and we get into a little dry spell, you're not seeing any wilting at all. That's a good sign that it's now established and it's kind of getting the water that it needs all on its own and expanding those roots into the soil profile.
Great. Yeah, good suggestions. Another question that is interesting to me, can you talk about the difference between a blooming shrub such as an azalea with a single major bloom, I guess, season versus a shrub that blooms throughout seasons, such as the tea bush? And is there a botanical name for these different bloom strategies? Now, to me,
Mm.
I just tend to think of plants that grow in warmer climates like South Florida. They just don't need to go dormant, so they're able to bloom year round. But I have never heard there being any real botanical term for that. How about you?
So our favorite answer around here is I'm not sure, but I can look it up for you, right? So I'm not sure there's definitely differences, and some species have a really long window of bloom.
Mm,
And there probably is, botanists, we love to come up with all kinds of names. So there probably is a word for this.
yeah,
But I can't think of it on the top of my head, but I will look into it and I will get back I'll send it to Rose or to Emily, and maybe
great.
that person can get their answer. But you're right. Like in South Florida, the plants don't always go dormant, that they do up here. And so, it's that adaptation to where they're adapted to, what the season's like there. Up here in North Florida, we have very strong differences in season. So these plants want to get things done. Um, but I will look that up and I'll send it back to you guys.
Yeah, I'd be interested if you find anything. We're right at three. I am going to take these last two questions. If folks need to hop up, I understand. But the last two questions are both about watering. So the question is, if you don't have a sprinkler system, I'm going to combine them. How long should you water for a good amount of water at an
Ooh, great
individual
question.
time with a hose? Like just, your daily watering, how much water? And then for how long of a period of time should you water?
That's a great question. So when we talk about for establishing trees and shrubs, those numbers were on there. Like a gallon is like each time you water for a shrub, you want at least a gallon. For the trees, 2 to 3 gallons. But if you're watering, say, the landscape with a sprinkler and you want it to just, what you're going for is just to wet the top of the soil profile, right? Where the roots of the plants are. And so research, folks at UF have gone into this. And what you're trying to do is get to about a half inch to 3/4 of an inch over that area. So what you do is you go out and you get some rain gauges or the cat food cans or tuna fish cans. You kind of spread them out in the landscape, turn your sprinkler system on for 15 minutes, and then go see what you collected. If you only got a quarter of an inch, then you need to do it for at least half an hour to get that half an inch total volume applied to that area. So
But what
that's
if
how
you're
you
doing a hose or like a watering can?
So a hose or a water can, you just go by the gallonage, right? So it's either a gallon, 2 to 3 gallons to give yourself an amount of water that you're going to use. If you're going to, I don't like some folks will talk about putting a hose out and just like leaving it on to drip for a long time. You end up using way more water than is needed. And again, we're trying to use these Florida-friendly principles that are protective of water and not wasting water. And remember that any water that gets below your root system is not useful to the plant. So another thing while I'm talking about this deep watering, you will hear people talk about deep watering their landscape. It's not necessary, like, right? It's pushing water below your root system, it's pushing nutrients down below your root system. So it's not helpful. So, just wet that top, couple inches with about a half to 3/4 of an inch of irrigation water, and you're done.
Okay. Last quick follow-up.
I'm
Any
here for you guys now. Go ahead.
that hydrophobic soil?
So hydrophobic soil, right? So this is soil that is like repelling water. Sometimes fungi can cause that to happen, or sometimes if it's like so dry, and you can think of this as like some of the potting mixes you get, right? Or when you first get them, it almost like water beads off of them. Um, Naturally, that's not like, super common unless you got some really bad fill dirt or something. But that would be a great question for your local extension agent. Ask them what's going on because they might know something about that neighborhood or whatever's going on. And they might be able to, what I would think is I would want to scratch that up. And I'd want to get some good compost mixed in there to try to kind of get some life back into that soil to help mellow whatever's going on there out.
Great, awesome. Well, thank you so much again. Thank you to everyone who joined us today, and
Yeah,
thank you so
thank you.
much for this wonderful presentation. We did have a request as well for the watering graph you showed. I was wondering if you could shoot that over to us as like a
Yes, I'm going to send you the whole presentation and you can send the whole thing out.
perfect. Thank you so much. All right, well,
You're
everyone,
welcome.
have a great rest of your afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you again next month.
All
Bye.
right. Thank you.